Welcome to See by Starlight, where we survey the celestial symbols that forge the forms of our vitality. I'm Abigail Joy, your host, as we ply the past and present, hurtling into the horizons of horary and holistic health astrology. I am not a licensed medical professional. Do not take what I say as medical advice.
Okay, welcome to my first podcast, See by Starlight. This is exciting. I'm a little nervous. We're going to get through it. It's going to be fun. I'm going to start just by reading a chart, just so you can see how I do it, kind of a taste of my approach. So a couple years ago, a friend came to me and asked me to do a horary chart, and I will just go ahead and read the question and jump into the reading. He said, I've been feeling really tired and fatigued lately, and my right ear is plugged up. Drops in my ear haven't helped. I'm not sure what's going on. When will my health improve? Now, there are different ways to approach a health question. Sometimes you can look at the natal chart, and sometimes you can pull a chart based on when the illness first started. In this case, because it had kind of creeped up on him, and he never really had a moment where he had to kind of like stop his life and go lie down and, take a day off work or something like that. It was just sort of it crept up on him. So we didn't really have an exact moment when the illness started that we could pinpoint. So what we did instead is pull a horary chart. So for those of you listening on the podcast, I'm going to describe the chart. It was pulled on the 11th of September, 2021 in Mesa, Arizona. That's where I was living at the time. At 4:33 p.m. And we have 7 degrees Aquarius rising, and we have Saturn retrograde at 7 degrees Aquarius, exactly on the ascendant. That is the first thing I noticed. Now, there's another really striking thing about this chart. The midheaven is at 24 degrees Scorpio, and the moon is at 24 degrees Scorpio. So pretty very strong angular emphasis on this chart. A couple of other things, we have Jupiter in the first house at 24 degrees Aquarius. Jupiter's retrograde. I'll just quickly list the planets. Not all of them are relevant to the reading. The thing about health astrology is that you're not always going to look at all the planets. Because we're looking at a specific question, but I'm going to go ahead and list them anyway for anybody who is listening and they just kind of want to see the chart in their minds. So I use a quadrant-based house system. Let's see, we have the North Node in Gemini in the 4th house, 7 degrees Cancer for cusp of the 6th house. We have 19 degrees Virgo for the cusp of the 8th house. And here we have another striking conjunction, the Sun at 19 degrees Virgo as well, placed in the 8th house. Mars is at 28 degrees Virgo, and Mercury is also in the 8th house at 16 degrees Libra. The 8th house is pretty wide in this chart. Venus is 1 degree Scorpio, placed in the 9th house. I mentioned the moon is at 24 Scorpio on the midheaven, exactly on the midheaven. And then the South Node is in the 10th house at 4 degrees Sagittarius. Okay, that's a description of the chart. Now, let's talk about how I approach this. So the first thing that I usually do for health readings is try to get an idea of how serious the illness actually is. Because sometimes we're not sure, like, should I maybe go see a specialist about this, or is this just a normal thing that's going to pass? And the reason why I like to address this question first is that it can kind of give us, first of all, it can give you peace of mind to know what you're really dealing with, because sometimes these things are mysterious and you're just not sure, maybe I should see a doctor, or maybe I should just get some more rest. I don't know. And then second of all, depending on how serious the astrology says this is going to affect the interpretation for the rest of the chart. So I usually like to do that first. And the way that we do that is that we look at testimonies. There are testimonies for serious, and there are testimonies for normal. And what you do is you kind of list them, and then whichever one has the most strength is the answer. So For the testimonies for Sirius, the first one is that there's a malefic in the first house. And the second testimony is this is one that is written by William Lilly. He said that if the ascendant, the sun, and the moon are all debilitated, then the disease is throughout the whole body. So in this chart, the ascendant has Saturn exactly on it. That gives it debility because Saturn is a malefic. The moon is in fall in Scorpio, so the moon is debilitated. The sun is placed in the 8th house and conjunct Mars, the malefic, so that's also a debility. So because all three of those points are debilitated, that is a testimony for this is Sirius. But I will say, each of these has, it's kind of mitigated too. So Saturn being in the first house, yeah, we don't like to see that, but it's in its own sign of Aquarius. And the question being asked about relates to the ears, and the ears are ruled by Saturn. So Saturn being angular and right there prominent in the chart could just be a sign that this is a radical chart. Radical meaning it's rooted, it's actually the right chart for the question. This is the heavens are answering this question by telling us ears ruled by Saturn, putting it right there at the beginning of the chart. So I would say that's kind of a mitigation of the debility. The moon being in Scorpio, yeah, we don't love that, but it's angular and it's the sign of fall. Anything that's exaltation or fall can point to it's exaggerated a little bit. It's not that it's not bad. It is bad, but it's also kind of being blown up a little bit in your mind. And you kind of need to get perspective. Whenever, and it's the same way with exaltation. It's good, yeah, but it's also sort of maybe a little, you're sort of overhyping it a little bit. And then another thing that mitigates the debility of this moon is that it's applying to its dispositor. So Mars rules Scorpio, the moon is in Scorpio, and the moon's next aspect is a sextile to Mars. This is what we call reception, meaning a planet is aspecting its dispositor or the ruler of the sign that it's placed in. And this can greatly diminish the debility of the moon. So I would say we have testimonies for Sirius, yeah, but they're all mitigated. So I'm kind of already going, okay, well, let's look at the other side of the ledger here. Let's look at the testimonies for a normal thing that will pass with normal care. We have a benefic in the first house. So we have the malefic there, but we also have Jupiter in the place in the first house. Another testimony is that the ruler of the first house, Saturn, is dignified. Another testimony is that the ruler of the first does not aspect the ruler of a bad house. So what are bad houses? 6, 8, and 12. So we're going to look at the ruler of the first. That's Saturn. And we're going to see if it has any aspects with the ruler of the sixth, which is Cancer and the moon. So does Saturn aspect the moon? The moon's at 24 Scorpio and Saturn is at 7 Aquarius. They do not aspect each other. At least not in the orbs that I use. Okay, the ruler of the 8th house is Mercury. So does Saturn aspect Mercury? Mercury's at 16 Libra and Saturn's at 7 Aquarius. And so that would put them 9 degrees apart. I don't consider that in orb for Mercury or Saturn. So no, they don't aspect each other. And now let's look at the 12th house, which is Capricorn. It's the same thing as Saturn, so that's a moot point. So we definitely qualify for point number 3. The ruler of the first does not aspect a ruler of the bad house. Okay, so that's another testimony for normal disease. Another testimony that applies here is that the ruler of the first is stronger than the ruler of the sixth. So as mentioned, ruler of the first is Saturn and the ruler of the sixth is the moon. Saturn has dignity in Aquarius, and the moon is in fall in Scorpio. So ruler of the first house of vitality, Saturn, is stronger than the illness. Okay, so good. That's another testimony. Is the ruler of the first stronger than the ruler of the eighth? Okay, we talked about Saturn already. Ruler of the eighth is Mercury. Mercury is in Libra and doesn't have any dignity. It's peregrine. It's also placed in the eighth house, so it's not in a very strong position at all. So again, so our first house vitality is stronger than the eighth house of chronic illness. Okay, so that's what, how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 testimonies. And then the last testimony that applies to this chart is that the moon is swift and the moon is waxing. If the moon is both swift and waxing, that's a testimony for a normal disease that will resolve itself with normal care. So we have 6 testimonies for good, 2 testimonies for bad, good wins. So the first thing I can tell my friend is deep breath, gonna be fine. We can deal with this with normal care. It's not an urgent issue. The next question to answer is whether the illness is purely physical in nature or whether it also has a mental or a spiritual or emotional component to it. Lily has pages and pages of documentation on how to determine this. Some of them are kind of conflicting and difficult. I've tried to sort of weed through it and distill it down to something that makes sense for me. And this is another type of reading where you want to look at testimonies. So one testimony is that Saturn rules depression and a disturbed mind, or what Lily calls, quote, vexatious care, which is kind of, I like that term, vexatious care. If Saturn is the ruler of the first, Lily says, that is one testimony for that there could be kind of a depression or a vexatious care element to the illness. Now, when you read a horary chart, it's called judgment for a reason because you have to use your judgment. And I already mentioned the question is about the ears. I mean, it's about fatigue overall, but also specifically about a blocked ear. Now, Saturn rules blockages and Saturn rules the ear. And you know what? Saturn also rules heaviness and fatigue and weariness. So when I see the testimony that says if Saturn rules the first house, then it could be related to emotional distress or depression, I have to weigh that with the fact that the question itself is being asked of a Saturnian type of physical problem. So I'm not going to give that a lot of weight as being like, yes, there's definitely an emotional component to this. I'm just going to say, okay, that's interesting. I'm going to put it on a maybe list, right? Another testimony that Lily lists is that if the ascendant and the moon are afflicted and both of their dispositors are also afflicted, then the disease is both mental and physical. That is a complex if-then statement. So if the AC and the moon are afflicted and both of their dispositors are afflicted, then the disease is both mental and physical. So going back to the chart, the ascendant we already mentioned is afflicted. The moon we already mentioned is afflicted. Okay, we already know that. What about their dispositors? Well, the dispositor of the ascendant is Saturn. And Saturn does have an affliction in that it's retrograde. So I would say yes, it is afflicted as well. What about the moon's dispositor? That would be Mars. So yes, Mars is afflicted because Mars is under the beams of the sun. It's 9 degrees away from the sun, so that's still in the beams. And it's also placed in the 8th house. So because all of those boxes are ticked, then according to Lily, the disease is both mental and physical. So I'm going, yeah, half and half. I'd say there's an emotional component to it, but there's also a physical component to it as well. It's not just it's not purely like, you know, you had a breakup and you're just really depressed on it and it wore your system down and that caused the illness. There's also a physical thing going on here too, if that makes sense. Okay, so we talked about how serious it is. We talked about whether it's mental or physical. Now let's get into the meat of the illness itself. Okay, so when we get to this section, you always want to start with the moon. The moon rules the body in general. It's the closest celestial object to Earth, and thus it's sort of everything to all people, right? The moon is just primary, absolutely super important in every chart, and especially in horary and especially in health. So we want to look at the moon. Okay. And the rule is that the moon's last aspect equals the cause of the disease. Okay. So the moon's last aspect, technically speaking, was a square from Jupiter. Now the moon is just barely past the square to Jupiter. I mean, it's still, so Jupiter is at 24 degrees Aquarius and it's retrograde, and the moon is at 24 degrees Scorpio. They're just minutes apart, just minutes. So the moon is just like fresh off of that, right? So I'm also going to look at the aspect right before that one as well, and I'm going to include it in our diagnosis of like what's going on here. So right before or before the moon separated from Jupiter, she made a sextile from the sun. Sun's at 19 degrees Virgo. So I would say that is all kind of mixed together. That energy is all kind of mixed together of Jupiter and the sun as being the last aspects of the moon. Whenever you see Jupiter and the sun together in health astrology, one of the things that like putting them together is the cardiovascular system, because the sun rules the heart and Jupiter rules the liver. And in ancient thought, they believed that the blood was generated from the liver and sent to the heart, and that kind of forms our cardiovascular system. So, on the physical side of things, I'm thinking, okay, something with the cardiovascular system, some kind of sluggishness, because Jupiter's in a fixed sign, it's retrograde. There's like maybe, your circulation, you're just not getting enough circulation in the blood, in the cardiovascular system, or there could be inflammation because the sun is conjunct Mars in the blood vessels, something that led up to this state of fatigue and blockage. Now, what about the emotional side of things? So we talked about it might be kind of partially affected by emotions. Jupiter often points to spiritual or religious ideas, or concepts around wealth or abundance. The sun can be about courage. It can be about leadership. It can be about authority. It can be about your self-esteem. So there could be emotional kind of a discouragement around maybe something happened with an authority figure, and or something happened where you didn't live up to your standards for yourself as far as like your courage or kind of your solar qualities of like standing up and shining, and that could affect your spiritual state, kind of leading you to question like your belief system, something like that. Now, if the client were here in person, we could talk more in depth about it. They could find, from their life how that symbolism kind of applies. This is just sort of a general idea of what the symbols might be speaking to. Now let's talk about the moon situation right now in this chart, the current. So we talked about the last aspects of the moon. Now, what is she doing in the moment? We mentioned that the moon is in fall. So, excuse me, there's a sense of discomfort, lack of resources, but there's also, as I mentioned, a sense of it kind of being overblown in your head. And to me, this kind of is like, especially with Scorpio, Scorpio tends to like hold things in and contain it. Scorpio is a water sign, but it's like a swamp water. It's water that sits and kind of like festers, But the moon, the reason why the moon is in fall in Scorpio is that the moon needs to flow. Those emotions need, those tears need to be cried. Those emotions need to flow through you. What it looks like is that the illness is kind of about like holding things that need to flow, whether that's emotional or physical. So like, we talked about the circulation being affected. It could be kind of stagnant. When your circulation is stagnant, that can lead to stagnant lymph, your lymphatic system. And the lymph is sort of the trash system of the body. It purges all of the waste products that are produced by the chemical processes that go on the body constantly. And if the lymph doesn't flow, then those the trash builds up in your body, right? And so there's that kind of energy that I see here. But then there's also this idea of being in fall, the idea that you need to take a break. Whenever you see a planet in fall as representing something important in the chart, you want to think, oh, you got to take a vacation. You got to get just get some perspective, go talk to friends, go do something totally different. Just you're stressing about it, So yeah, you just want to take some time out. You want to recharge those batteries, spend time in nature, whatever that looks like for you. You got to kind of just get your head on straight again because you're kind of stuck in your own mind, right?
I hope you are enjoying the See by Starlight podcast. To enable me to continue producing this show, please join my subscription. You can get exclusive members-only articles, including a monthly herbal recipe, a bonus podcast episode each month, insider updates on my research projects, and much more. Plus, get the chance to ask me anything. Don't miss out. Subscribe today through the link in the show notes.
Okay, next thing we're going to do, because this is getting kind of long, there's all kinds of more interesting things we could look at in the chart. But I want to move on to the humoral analysis. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word, humoral or humoral. The analysis of the humors. The humors theory is surprisingly complex, but I'm going to simplify it as much as I can. Okay, so as you probably know, the ancients believed that everything was made of four humors, sanguine, melancholy, choleric, and phlegmatic humors. And then that translates to the elements that we think of as like earth, air, fire, water. I didn't do those in the same order. They don't correlate. Right, so we have the four elements, and each of the elements has two qualities. So fire is hot and dry. Earth is cold and dry. Water is cold and wet. Air is hot and wet. Okay. So what you do to create an analysis of the humors is you make a table. Okay. So you take the sixth cusp, the sign that the ruler of the six is placed in. You take the nature of the ruler of the six. You take the ascendant, the ruler of the ascendant, and the moon. And you break them down by quality. Now, this is debated whether you should do quality or actual elements. I do qualities. I find it works better, but your mileage may vary. The reason why I'm differentiating this is it's not the elements itself, it's the qualities of the elements. So what I mean by the qualities is hot, cold, wet, and dry, not earth, air, fire, water, right? So if there's an earth sign, we're going to get a tally for cold and a tally for dry because earth is cold and dry. Okay, so you see how that works? So what you do is you go through and you look at each of those 6 points I mentioned and you tally the qualities. How many checks do we have for hot? How many checks do we have for cold? How many checks for wet? How many checks for dry? And so on. And that gives us an idea of whether we have one of the qualities that's out of balance. So doing that with this chart, the sixth cusp is in Cancer. Cancer is a water sign. Water is cold and wet. So check for cold, check for wet. The sign that the ruler of the six is in. So ruler of the six is Moon. Moon is in Scorpio. Scorpio's water sign. And water is cold and wet. You see those steps? You see this is complicated? Keeps going. Then, so we do that the same for the ascendant. The ascendant is air. Air is hot and wet. Now, I know that seems weird because we said the ascendant is Aquarius, and Aquarius is like in the northern hemisphere, it's the middle of winter, it's freezing, it's ruled by Saturn, which is cold. Like, why is Aquarius hot and wet? There are a lot of kind of paradoxes in the zodiac. You just gotta like accept it. Aquarius is an air sign. It's hot and wet. Deal with it. It took me a while to like swallow that because I was like, no, Aquarius is cold. But it is what it is. It's an air sign, so it's hot and wet. Okay. The ruler of the ascendant, Saturn, is in Aquarius, so another set of checks for hot and wet. The moon is in Scorpio. Now the moon rules the sixth, so this is a duplication here. But that's just how it worked out in this chart. It's not always going to work out that way. The moon isn't always the ruler of the sixth in every chart. And then the last thing, I put it last because it's different from all the others. So the other ones we're looking at the signs the planets are in, and we're analyzing the sign. But then we also want to look at the nature of the ruler of the sixth. So in addition to every sign or element having qualities, the planets have qualities, right? So the sun is hot and dry. It makes sense. It's hot, right? The moon is cold and wet. Okay, so the ruler of the sixth is cold and wet. The nature of the moon is cold and wet. So we put all these check marks together into a table, and we have 2 tallies for hot, 4 tallies for cold, 6 tallies for wet, and 0 tallies for dry. So what do we see? We see an abundance of wet. We see an overbalance of wet. And we need to dry the system off. Then what we're going to do is we're going to compare that with the nature of the ascendant. So the ascendant is ruled by Saturn. Saturn is cold and dry. Saturn needs to be dry. But we have all this wetness in the system. So this leads into my theory built up of like a stagnant circulation leading to stagnant lymph, leading to an excessive buildup of fluid. And then that leads to the plugged ear and the fatigue. Okay, so that's what I am guessing. What we need to do is we need to dry you off, right? And we need to get that circulation going. We need to get the lymph flowing, and we need to get some dryness in the system so that you can, kind of drain it out. And the reason why the drops in the ears didn't work is because drops are wet, and you already have too much wetness. You need to dry it out. So what I would recommend, what I did recommend for my friend is, okay, eat some spicy food. Take a day off work. Do something just for yourself. Just whatever you want to do, relaxing. Just get your mind off of stuff and go do something fun. Whether that's sitting at home and, just chilling on the couch, or going out for a walk in nature, or, whatever it's going to do for you. But you order some Indian food or some kind of, spicy food. Get some spicy food, get that circulation going, and recharge. But recharge in a way that's going to activate your circulation and get that lymph flowing as well. An excellent herb that promotes drainage and reduces inflammation in the ears specifically is an herb called ground ivy. And this is it's a weed that grows pretty much like literally everywhere. And it specifically targets the ears. It's pretty amazing. I didn't know about ground ivy at the time of this reading, so I didn't recommend it to him. But if it had happened today, I would have said maybe go get some tincture of ground ivy to help reduce inflammation in the ears. And it's kind of astringent. It'll sort of dry up a little bit, get things all toned and properly, in their places. Quick note, I'm editing a little bit because I didn't mention this when I was originally recording. Do not drop tinctures into your ears. I wasn't clear on that. Ground ivy tincture is taken orally. You can take a dropper full several times a day by mouth. The effects go to your ears, but don't drop tinctures into your ears, please. Do some physical gentle exercises. Just get your body moving, get the circulation moving, get that lymph flowing. Massage would be excellent if you can get it, because we just want that stagnation. We need the stagnation to move to a state of flow. Ginger is an excellent herb for that as well. Now, as far as on the spiritual side of things, I know that my friend is he practices meditation, and so I recommended, maybe do some meditation about maybe bring up an image in your mind of like a plain that has water flooded into it. And then imagine in your mind irrigation ditches or, something that causes the water to flow and drain that field out and just get the water to flow properly. into its right place. So all of these together. Now I mentioned this was a few years ago, so I do know the results. He said that he took my advice to heart, and he was extremely impressed by how much better he felt pretty quickly. And within a few days, the issue of the ear had resolved. He started having more energy, and just took some time out for self-care and focus on getting those waters flowing. So it's a success story. Good one to start the podcast with. So that's the chart reading. I hope you enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. I am hoping that this podcast can be a regular showcase of charts, astrological charts that we can read, and it could be another medical focus reading or horary questions as well, related to other types of topics. I also have a membership program, and as people sign up for that, you'll be qualified to send in questions for Ask Me Anything, and literally ask me anything, whether related to medical astrology or natural health, or even just random, what's your favorite animal? Ask me anything. I'll answer it on the podcast. I'm hoping to make this place a kind of a fun feature for you guys. So let me know what you'd like to see on the podcast, and any other topics you'd like to cover. Definitely check out my website, seebystarlight.com. I'm excited to meet you. So definitely head over to my website, look into the membership, look into my services, and let's talk. All right, thanks. See you later. Oh, I need my glasses, but they cause a glare.